Welcome to today's technical briefing. We're going to be unpacking an explainer of some truly critical source material today, focusing on how the rules of global power are being completely rewritten right in front of us. As analysts, we're seeing traditional military doctrines absolutely collapse. They're being replaced by this chaotic new reality where incredibly cheap technology and highly specific geographical bottlenecks are literally weaponizing our global supply chains. So let's dive right into the core question that is currently keeping defense strategists and global economic planners awake at night. How exactly are off-the-shelf drones and incredibly narrow straits defeating billion-dollar militaries? Because right now, we're looking at a landscape where all that traditional defense spending, it no longer guarantees the security of international trade routes. 20%. Just sit with that number for a second. That is the sheer volume of the world's petroleum trade that flows through the Strait of Hormuz. It highlights exactly why these maritime choke points are so aggressively targeted. I mean, when a fifth of the entire planet's energy sits inside a single, narrow geographic corridor, whoever disrupts that flow can trigger massive, cascading, long-term impacts on global economic stability. To break this down, here's our agenda for the briefing. We'll cover weaponizing global choke points, the asymmetric tech disruption, striking the crown jewels, the superpower retaliation, and finally, diplomacy through force. Starting right off with Section 1, weaponizing global choke points, and using geography as a literal weapon. Think about the Strait of Hormuz. This highly strategic maritime corridor is the textbook example of leveraging a geographic bottleneck. This one narrow stretch of water allowed a regional power to trap 7 massive tankers, holding over 160 million barrels of oil. By using swarms of fast attack boats and suicide drones, proxy forces essentially paralyzed regional logistics overnight. They sent tanker insurance premiums completely skyrocketing and just instantly weaponized the entire supply chain. Moving on to Section 2, the asymmetric tech disruptions. To really understand how these supply chain disruptions even happen, we have to look closely at the technology itself. Take the relatively cheap Ukrainian drone models like the Luti and Bober. They operate with total autonomy. We're talking over 10 hours of flight endurance and AI-supported optical terrain recognition. So when a billion-dollar electronic warfare system tries to jam their GPS, these drones don't even care. They just look down at the ground, navigate independently, and completely bypass those traditional, expensive defense grids. For us analysts, this presents a wildly asymmetric return on investment. On one side, you have a giant Russian Su-57 stealth fighter, costing upwards of $120 million and requiring massive, vulnerable runway infrastructure. And on the other side, a kamikaze drone that costs just tens of thousands of dollars. It's mass-produced, it skims the treetops, and it's a massive vulnerability for traditional powers. These scarce, incredibly expensive assets are being permanently depleted by cheap, smart machines. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that massive landmass and the old doctrine of having a safe rear simply do not provide security anymore. When unmanned systems can bypass radar and strike targets 1,700 kilometers deep, it means that industrial bases and logistical hubs are completely exposed, no matter how far they are from the actual front line. Let's look at a practical application in Section 3, striking the crown jewels. We actually saw this vulnerability play out in real time. Fearing these frontline strikes, Russia desperately tried to hide its rarest jets, secretly moving them way back behind the Ural Mountains. But we live on a transparent digital battlefield now. Ukrainian cyber units easily deciphered their railway telemetry and exposed the whole operation. So, on April 25th, an unmanned drone army simply flew over the border and scored direct, devastating hits on 4 of these irreplaceable aircraft. I mean, listen to that description from the source material. It represents an irreplaceable loss. Because of heavy technological sanctions, the Russian aerospace sector cannot easily replace $100 million jets. It severely stunts their long-term technological progress. It's a complete psychological and economic collapse when a superpower realizes literally nowhere within their own borders is safe from this kind of asymmetric disruption. Which brings us to Section 4, the superpower retaliation. So how exactly does a global superpower secure its critical supply chains against these swarm tactics? Well, when Iranian fastboats and drones locked onto U.S. destroyers in the Strait of Hormuz, U.S. Central Command didn't just play defense. They reacted with a doctrine of calculated, overwhelming precision. First, they neutralized the immediate threats, and then they immediately launched a massive retaliatory air operation straight from the UAE, aiming right at the source. And the operational results were incredibly systematic. The U.S. military blinded and disarmed Iran's entire 1,600-kilometer kill zone without putting a single ground troop in harm's way. They wiped out the anti-ship missile ramps at Bandar Abbas. They dropped precision munitions to literally seal the entrances of underground missile cities on Kashim Island, and they permanently blinded the early warning radar hubs in Sarik. It was this flawless, brutal demonstration of conventional force, utterly dismantling an asymmetric threat. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Diplomacy Through Force, and the final ultimatum. What's fascinating here for analysts is how that overwhelming military destruction was essentially used as a battering ram for diplomatic de-escalation. Delivered secretly through Pakistani mediation, a 30-day ceasefire framework was dropped on the table as a final off-ramp to end the blockade. The demands were clear: open the strait immediately, restrain your proxy networks, and halt the nuclear program. The military stripes weren't just retaliation, they were the enforcement mechanism to prevent further escalation. This statement from the former U.S. administration perfectly underscores that peace through strength strategy. It neutrally illustrates a harsh geopolitical reality. In these choke points, diplomacy is enforced by raw deterrence. It is a psychological pressure campaign. The goal is to collapse the adversary's asymmetric capability, making it crystal clear that failing to sign the diplomatic agreement will result in the total erasure of their remaining assets. So, will the Iranian leadership bow to this final warning and negotiate, or will they risk total regional destruction? As global shipping chains continue to bleed and insurance rates soar, we're going to leave you with this incredibly high-stakes question. It really forces us to ponder the fragile future of our long-term economic stability. Because whether it's cheap drones bypassing radars in the freezing Urals or superpower naval forces dismantling blockades in the Middle East, the entire architecture of warfare and its devastating impact on global trade has changed forever. We hope this explainer of the source material helped you map out exactly how. Thanks so much for joining today's briefing.